Good morning, everyone, and welcome at the GreenDeal-NET roundtable debate on a clean industrial deal. Decarbonizing energy-intensive industries, it's something that we've been working on at the Brussels School of Governance for a while. It's basically my pet topic, my life work. We are very excited to see that this topic has gained much more importance over the last couple of years, but also that we will see at the European level initiatives that help industry move it in that direction via, for instance, the Clean Industrial Deal that has been announced. My name is Thomas Wins. I'm your moderator today, and we have an excellent and diverse panel today to guide you through the debate. And let me start by introducing them. And we start off with Marzena Rogalska, who is Principal Advisor for Industrial Decarbonization at Directorate General for Climate Action at the European Commission. We have Florie Goncelin, who is the Director of Industrial Transformation at a project at CEFIC. We have Adina Georgescu, who is the Energy and Climate Change Director at Eurometo. We have Lucas Hermville, who is the co-head research unit transformative industrial policy at the Wuppertal Institute for Climate and Environment and Energy. And finally, we have Johanna Lehne, who is the Associate Director in Clean Economy Program Lead on Industrial Decarbonization and Trade Policy at E3G. So you see, we have quite a lot of experts together here, and let me basically start with an opening question to all panelists, and it's basically about the state of EU industry, and we see EU-wide and certainly in some of the larger European economies, some negative news, production being down in energy-intensive sectors or sectors that are important for energy-intensive industries. So what is your view currently on the situation of industry, and what do you see as the short and medium-term outlook? And I'll run the question in the order of the panel I have in front of me. And maybe let's start with Marzena, because you will have to leave within an hour, I heard earlier.
So first of all, good morning to everyone. Let me start by not answering the question directly, but indirectly, as we are debating here, our commissioner designate, current commissioner with the mission of being designated for the next mandate is having his hearing. So I wonder whether any of you was following the first half an hour, which is live streamed from the Parliament's website, but he has charted his vision for the next 5 years for climate action, for European industrial competitiveness, for just transition and international dimension. So now we are in the time of questions and answers for political groups, which probably gives us a little better understanding what is the mood in the room. Although I think that when it comes to the industrial competitiveness, many things have been said, and probably we won't hear any surprising reactions. So as you said, the situation of especially energy-intensive industries is compounded by many simultaneous challenges. And indeed, the geopolitical and geo-economic outlook and situation is quite complex. It does not help that the most industrialized EU countries face also certain internal political challenges. Everybody reads newspapers, so I understand you perfectly know what I'm referring to. So what is what can we do in this world of uncertainties? I think that Commissioner Hoekstra is very clear. The answer to that is predictability. So in the chaos, we need to have something that is stable, predictable, and we know in which direction to go. And I think in that context, enshrine net zero by 2050, gives the long-term predictability. We have an action plan how to, or what we should do by 2030. So obviously in the first mandate days of the mandate, there is a question: what do we do with the time in between? But I think when it comes to the energy-intensive industries, because they are very technology-intensive, and the investment lead times are very long, in that sense, this perspective of kind of in-between step of 2040 is less perhaps crucial than for the others, because once you take deep decarbonization decision, you basically go from zero to hero, so to say. So that's the specificity of the sector. So now what can be done? I think that the first thing to say is that we have quite a good understanding and dialogue with the industry, which started already with the Clean Transition Dialogues and now announced by the President, and with her presence conducted by Vice President Šefčovič, which brought to the table both the supply and demand side. We also have quite now promising Antwerp declaration process launched by sectors themselves to actually engage in those cross-sectorial conversation, because even if each sector has their own specificities, in the end they share one very important characteristics, which is the energy intensity and the strong correlation and dependence on the pace and success of energy system transition. So I think that there are many conversations, many roundtables. Many of you who are here, you represent organizations which hold more public, less, more, sometimes close those conversations. So we know what needs to happen. So I think that for this particular sector, this is more the question: how we do it, and what is the most cost-efficient way to actually achieve it. And there is also realization that the biggest balancing act that Europe needs to get is answer the question, energy transition, cost of energy transition, the energy prices. So, for example, the elephant in the room is how much of resilience, economic security for self-manufacturing of, for example, wind energy equipment in Europe, or immediate access to cheaper wind energy products to put it on board. So that's one question. Second question is, and this is quite stunning and was clearly mentioned in the hearing by the Commissioner designate for energy, is that, and of particular importance to energy intensives, is the fact that for last 20 years, the scale of electrification of energy system in Europe is stagnant. We are on about on the level of 22-23% only, and that has not changed much. And despite the technological diversity that is available for the decarbonization of energy-intensive industries, in the end relies in one form or the other on access to, it's through electrification, and that means access to reliable and affordable electricity for industrial processes, leaving aside obviously the molecules for the processes and the whole story of hydrogen and CO2 networks that need to be in place. So one part obviously of the Clean Industrial Deal will be to look how to translate the question, the issue of affordable and stable supply that we have been, is not a new topic. I dealt with energy policy in 2010, and that was a topic as well. Very important. We are 15 years later, and it remains a topic. It is an inherent feature of Europe that we've never been a cheap place when it comes to electricity prices. When you look at the structure of the bill, the retail prices, wholesale prices are not so bad, although much higher than other places. But also, you know, the electricity in the end bill has all the other levies and taxes resulting from upgrades of the network, etc. So here is the issue, you know, to what extent the cost of the transition of any sector is lumped onto the, you know, industrial customers, and not every member state has enough budget, you know, to generously support or compensate a certain part of this electricity. So I think there is an understanding that the issue of energy prices need to be tackled in more pragmatic way, and with special focus on special kind of customers energy intensive. So I would expect in the Green Industrial Deal a strong electrification investment program, but it's also about not only, you know, putting additional capacity, but also changing dramatically the way we use this energy for energy intensive industries to think how they can become a modern energy player in this new landscape. Then, of course, the second big topic is demand for clean products, and related to that issue of competitiveness, because even our focus so far has been in policymaking on the supply side of decarbonization. We need to think on the demand side, and here there is a clear announcement from the DG GROW on working on public procurement framework, how to, you know, put a conducive legislative environment to make green premiums and green public procurement almost a default case especially at this initial stages of the transition, where the big transformation of energy intensive industries burns the cost of current activity and future activity. So that's where we will put lots of attention under the Clean Industrial Deal, creation of lead markets. And with that, of course, comes we have been traditionally in Europe an exporter continent. We are too small to be a closed economy. So the issue of competitiveness is two-way competitiveness. It's not only effective implementation of CBAM with potential adjustments to maybe extension of the scope, remains to see. But this is to protect the internal competitiveness. But there is also this issue, how and what is the value proposition in terms of our, how to translate the decarbonization regulatory leadership into tangible results for industrial value creation. And in that context, we talk about clean trade and investment agreements, where we would like to see increased and concerted action between the Commission and Team Europe. So member states in engaging or re-engaging and redefining engagement with third countries, which should also become our business partners. So the big conversation is to have how the industry sees this diversification of value chains, sharing out the value chains and creating this symbiotic relationship. I know in Antwerp declaration process, different elements of Clean Industrial Deal were discussed because the topics are clear. It's just not, it needs collective wisdom how to put it in place in cost-effective way. But I think we still have not had sufficient conversation, which is obviously difficult because it pertains to sensitive parts of economic activity of each of the actors. How we tackle actually for industrial gain, also relations with third countries. So and then obviously there is dimension of fair transition, skills. But grosso modo, the two words that I would like to say that will be the guiding principle of the Clean Industrial Deal is innovation, technology, how to be the winner, or at least maintain the place at the table of technological excellence, and secondly, how to take the businesses with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you also for the comprehensive overview of the policy avenues towards a green industrial deal. Let's move back to industry. And Flory, the state of the chemical industry is really of concern at the moment. It's been the stronghold of, let's say, European industry, even through past crises. What do you see at the moment, and what do you, as a sector, expect over the next couple of years?
Yes. First of all, thank you for the invitation. And yes, of course, Thomas, you are absolutely right. So, of course, like any industry, we are, let's say, subject to economic cycles with ups and downs. But what we see for the last few years is that we are definitely into something different. And that's the current difficulties and let's say negative trends that we see in the industry are not just a matter of 1 or 2 years, but we are in for a deeper change in the industries and the competitive position of the EU chemical industry worldwide. So. Of course, the industry's resilience and not only chemicals has been heavily tested for the last few years with a series of shocks. COVID was the first one, which, let's say, brought to light a little bit the vulnerability of industries. But I think one that the chemical sector has been able to overcome quite successfully. Where it became much more difficult is after the war started between Russia and Ukraine, and the impact that it had on energy prices for the chemical sector, including natural gas prices that are an important, let's say, feedstock for the chemical and all the ammonia fertilizer value chain. And that were, let's say, primarily hit by this, let's say, rising prices. Of course, yes, the situation looks better today, but it's always important to look at the comparison with our competitors. And what is clear for now is that looking at and with energy prices being one big component of, let's say, the cost structure. Of the chemical sector. Today, European producers are not competitive with our Asiatic or even North American competitors. This in the context where China is heavily investing into new capacity. That cannot be absorbed by the local market, maybe because the growth was overestimated there. And that means that China is now looking for outlets to absorb this overcapacity. I think this is not the first time we witness this type of issues. Like the steel sector, I think, went more or less through the same difficulties over the last 10 years, I might say. And yeah, this is a little bit what we see happening in the case of chemicals. And with now the, let's say, evolution also happening on the US and the result of the elections yesterday might also have an impact if US starts raising, let's say, custom duties for Chinese goods, then Europe might be a little bit the collateral victim of this, let's say, changing trade patterns. So what is positive to this quite, let's say, dark picture is that we now really see a realization of let's say the difficulties and really the gravity of the situation. And with industrial policy and competitiveness being clearly a top priority for the next Commission. The Antwerp, I think, process and let's say the impact it had, I think, contributed to this realization. We think that the priorities have been well recognized in the new Commission's agenda. If you look at the Antwerp Declaration, I think you can put them into a few broad categories. Market creation, Marzena wrote this. I think this is a very important angle and maybe something, I mean, you will remember, Thomas, we have been discussing for many years, but now it really seems to be identified as a priority for next upcoming policies. We have, of course, energy, access to energy and raw materials at competitive, let's say, prices for the chemical. It's always important to repeat that and the supporting infrastructure for this. But I think, yeah, what I would like to come back later, and I think that's the intention of this event is also more the feedstock aspect, which is very important for the chemical industry and is often forgotten in the context of circularity, for example. Then an innovative framework, so policies and general framework that are conducive to innovation and innovating in Europe, because we are losing a little bit our competitive edge there as well as Europe. The single market, for example, I could bring this in the context of waste. How do we let's say have low flows of waste to be transported across borders to support the circularity? So that's one important example for the chemical sector. And last but not least, policy making. So that would mean having industrial policy clearly identified as a top priority. I think there we can already tick the box with Executive Vice President being in charge of industry and competitiveness. So that's a very important, let's say, achievement, and the fact that the Clean Industrial Deal will be a flagship initiative for the Commission within the first 100 days. Burden reduction, I think there has been acknowledgement by the Commission that this is something we need to aim for. There I need to be, let's say, very clear on the fact that the Antwerp Declaration has never been about replacing the Green Deal, but it's about operationalizing it. So it's not no regulation, but we need better regulation. All this said, I think what I would really like to insist on is that, yeah, the European Green Deal will remain a general strategy. Let's say, personally, I don't expect this to solve all the issues for the chemical sector. So it's very important that at the strategic level, we are looking in the right direction, and that all these priorities are taken forward by the Commission. I think what also matters very much for us as the chemical sector is to have much more, let's say, spelled out sectoral strategies, because the chemical sector is not the steel sector, it's not the non-ferrous metal sector, is not the paper sector. So while it's important to have this overarching approach, we also believe at the same time it's important to develop sectoral approaches, because the chemical sector has really its own specificities. The fact that there will be a chemicals, let's say, package that will also look at the impact of our products on health and the environment, or the very important role that carbon plays in the chemical sector as let's say, building block for chemistry, is something that might put us apart from at least certain sectors. That's why we have been very active as CEFIC in the last years to work on these sectoral approaches. We have developed the transition pathway for the chemical sector together with DG Grow, but of course other DGs of the Commission are involved in its co-implementation process. What the climate law was calling for is sectoral roadmaps. We, on our side, are very active looking at this. We have even developed our own, let's say, IT tool to be able to model the pathways for the chemical sector to climate neutrality and circularity. We will present our results on the 9th of December. And yeah, I think this is very good basis to start discussing sectoral approaches for the chemical sector. And we really hope to have, let's say, a detailed and open debate with the Commission and with DG CLIMA about that one, because the devil is in the details. So just staying at the level of the high-level strategy, I'm afraid will not, let's say, help us overcome all the important challenges that we are facing.
Okay. Well, thank you, Florie, for this update, and also the insights into the specific challenges for the chemical industry. Let's move to the non-ferrous metal industry, Adina, which is fascinating in the sense that it is a sector seen as delivering key materials for the transition, but also a sector that is highly electro-intensive and has been suffering, of course, due to the energy prices.
Thanks, Thomas. That's a very good introduction to our specificities. I will just add a bit more meat to the bone. So non-ferrous metals are aluminium, copper, nickel, lithium, zinc, cobalt, and a lot of other materials that are used in, as you said, in the energy and digital transition, in quite insignificant quantities. And even before the energy crisis, Europe was not fully resilient on these metals. The situation has evidently deteriorated as following the spike in the energy prices back in 2022, as a result of the still very high power prices in Europe. And I will just make a very clear distinction over here. As you said, we are highly electro-intensive usually. In let's say normal times, the share of the electricity cost in the final cost of aluminium smelter, for instance, or zinc smelter would be around 30 or 40%. So you can imagine that a spike of 10 euros per megawatt hour, that would deliver a huge increase in the total share of the cost of electricity. So we're talking here about electricity. So the process of producing primary aluminium or zinc or silicon for that matter, also a non-ferrous metal, it's fully electrified. So of course they were the first victims. They were the first victims of the increase in the power prices, and I am sad to say that the prices in Europe are still high. They're 2 or 3 times higher compared to the ones that are being enjoyed by our global competitors. Metals are active on a global market. So we are exposed to international competition, also, internal competition between the different member states. So, so the situation is not particularly rosy. We still have a lot of capacities that have not restarted. They closed as a result of the high power prices, and they still are not functioning yet. Overall, we have seen that half of the aluminium primary production in Europe has been wiped off by the power prices. Around 60% of silicon and ferroalloys as well. So in total, that would be around 20 curtailed facilities. And I'm sad to say that some of the aluminium smelters have closed. 2 of them have closed for good. Unfortunately, this big picture, but then I'll then move on to the more, let's say, to the more pragmatic, how can we fix this approach. The impact on the environment of these closures is on the global emissions is actually concerning. The closure of the aluminium production in Europe has been replaced by imports, and the production in Europe is one of the cleanest in the world. And I will give you just a number: 12 million tons of carbon has been added to the global emissions because of the closure of the aluminium capacities. So basically, if we want to be, the recipe is quite clear. The first step and the low-hanging fruit in reducing emissions at global level is to actually have production of respective industry in Europe, as that is has invested heavily in the last years and for decades in reducing of emissions and decarbonization, and also all these investments. And there are state-of-the-art plants that have been closed. All these investments, they must not be allowed to be lost, because with them we lose skilled people, we lose expertise, and we lose know-how, and we also lose the basis for innovation. Innovation doesn't appear out of the clear blue sky. You need to have first the basic production, and then to innovate on top of that. So I think that should be the logic that should surround the whole clean industrial deal. The clean industrial deal should focus on reopening and reopening the closed capacities, create the conditions for that. Also, the closed capacities, they are part. We also have the Critical Raw Materials Act that has targets for domestic for the 2030 for domestic capacities, and we are far from there, because of the closures, and also because we need to add more. So clean industrial deal should focus on preserving the existing industrial base and restarting the closed capacities, and then see how we could expand, attract more investments. And I agree here with Marzena, predictability is all. But it is also predictability not only related to where the policy or the pathway is, it's also predictability related to the costs. And that weighs I think the big elephant in every room, as the costs are not always, well, they're not, well, particularly the cost can come also from external actors. And yeah, the results, last day's result in the American elections, they also add more uncertainty to, well, the need for the predictability. And that is also something that companies need to consider in their business plans. But on how we could, a couple of ideas on what should the clean industrial deal entail. Obviously, as Marzena rightly pointed, the power supply, the access to abundant and available and decarbonized. It's not a question of the name, if it's low, if it's carbon, if it's green, it is, if it's decarbonized, as long as it is, and globally competitive electricity, that will be key. And the demand for electricity in Europe has decreased 7.5% from 2021, and half of that is related to the closure of the industry, the demand reduction in the industry. So and that is of the closure of the electrified capacity. So if we want to increase the electrification percentage, the low-hanging fruit there, the first step is to just restart the closed electrified capacities. And that will make a good story to also drive other sectors into electrifying, because right now being electrified is not a poster kid for being, it's not sending a big positive message. So abundant access to abundant decarbonized electricity, because production of metals is baseload. That entails a bit of a complication when it comes to accessing to consuming the variable renewable energy sources. So there we have the need to address the costs of matching the baseload profile to the intermittent profile of the renewable energy sources. And that is one aspect that I think the clean industrial deal should look at in addressing, going beyond the components of the taxes and levies, which it is correct that they constitute a big chunk of the final electricity cost, but to look at all the other components of the cost of consuming renewable decarbonized electricity, and to identify solutions for that. There is a possibility of providing potential subsidies for this cost of matching the profile. We also have seen that there's the credit risk of the off-takers, of consumers of electricity, large consumers, is an issue that is discouraging the signing of renewable energy PPAs, or PPAs in general. So guarantee schemes that would actually help the signature of more PPAs, and I think EIB could play a big role in this. Also, access to financing, all kinds of financing. I think it's would be needed from here, bringing the private sector financing together with the public one. We should not rely only on the public pockets, because those are quite depleted, I am afraid. But to reduce the burden of the state on the state budgets, we should provide some kind of hybrid loans or some kind of combined solutions of public and private funding. For that, we see a great potential to deliver for a raw materials bank, similar to the hydrogen bank, to deliver the targets of the Critical Raw Materials Act. And then when it comes to the public financing of the raw materials, of opening new capacities in Europe or reopening the closed ones, we see that there is a need for more harmonization at European level. And we see that there's a great potential for having dedicated stated guidelines for raw materials, and that would provide certainty to the national authorities, certainty to the industry, but also more harmonization and level playing field internally. I think what's important for the clean industrial is to have a value chain approach, because we don't want to replace one dependency with another. It's great to produce the wind turbines in Europe, but if we import, I don't know, the steel or the aluminium for that, we sadly moved the dependency down on the value chain. So a full value chain approach. And yeah, I have a lot of other solutions, but I will stop here to give time to the other speakers. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Adina. Also, thank you for pointing out the matter of urgency. We're talking about 2040 targets, but for an aluminum smelter, it is about the challenges of, let's say, yesterday and today. Talking about challenges, let's move to Germany and to Lucas from the Wuppertal Institute, where we the big political news this week in Germany, industrial crisis spilling over into a political one. How's the situation there, and what is, let's say, in the years of expertise you have in industrial strategy and in decarbonization of industries, what do you expect both from the German government and the European Union from a policy perspective?
Well, what do I expect? First of all, I think just to start on your main question on how we see industry in Europe, I think I was in China last week, and I think that it made very clear for me that maybe for the first time in several decades, Europe is no longer in the lead. And actually, we are at the point where we have to realize that China and others are making not only cheaper products, but also better products in many aspects. If you drive Chinese electric cars, they're just superior compared to the German ones. And even we had a workshop with the steel industry in China, where I also got the impression that even with respect to green steel production, the Chinese are not way behind Europe in this. They're not talking about it that much. So I think really we need to catch up. And I've thought long about an analogy to make this point clear. And what I came up with is kind of a bicycle racing analogy, where we've been in the lead for very long, and now there is someone passing by with a lot of momentum, and we're like, oh no, what to do? We need to catch up. I think generally Europe is in a good position with the single market, which is still a big asset with the ETS. But also, I think, Marzena, you mentioned that I think all the main actors are unified in the goal, not in the means of how to reach that, but I think almost everyone is now on the same page on where we need to go, and that we need to address this issue. But there's still a big chance that kind of the group will collapse, right? If we're not working together in a Belgian tourniquet drafting circle, when everyone starts working on each individually on their own goals, member states specifically, I think there's a big risk. And the other thing is that, again, cycling analogy, you know how important energy, nutrition, drinking energy drinks are. If you're not ingesting enough energy in terms of investments, I think there's a big risk that we're starving this effort. And this is, I think, where we've had we've underinvested heavily in the last decades, and maybe things get better after last week's news with Lindner not being in the finance ministry anymore in Germany, but I'm really not sure that that I'm expecting anything or what to expect from the next government. It's pretty clear that it's going to be a CDU-led government. On industrial policy, I must say that I have not seen so many detailed plans on their part, what they're up to, what their ideas are for a constructive industrial policy. So maybe it's somewhere where I can't see it, but I guess if we have a CSU government in the next round, they will also have to pick up speed in terms of industrial policy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you, Lucas. A bit surprised to hear that we don't see these initiatives on industrial policy emerging sooner from Germany. Johanna, last speaker, and thank you for your patience. What's your view from E3G side on the state of industry, but also the perspectives of getting out of this mess? Huh?
Thanks, Thomas, and it's great to be here. And the benefit as the last speaker is I can try and sort of think about what areas maybe haven't been touched on so much. And obviously what we've heard from the sector speakers so far is that generally the kind of immediate outlook for European industry is a bleak one. That is the nature of the conversation in Brussels at the moment. I looked up a couple of recent headlines just to kind of describe this. And if you look, there's one from Le Monde, which is the great decline of European industry. From Politico, German industrial woes deepen with fallen orders. And the most dramatic one from Bloomberg, which is Europe's industrial nightmares are coming true. So we really are in this situation where obviously, and we still saw really clearly from Florie and Adina, how this is very distinct and actually critical in certain sectors in their specificities and how this is coming through. Obviously, E3G is a climate change think tank, so we also are looking at this in terms of the transition, in addition to the competitiveness. And here I wanted to kind of draw attention to the fact that obviously, after a period of kind of stagnating emissions reductions from the sectors, we have obviously seen emissions reductions more recently, but those are obviously due to the energy price crisis and closures. So for us, that's really not a sustainable or structural decarbonisation trajectory, and it's not one that is beneficial for Europe. So definitely not the kind of transition that we want to be seeing in this context, and hence the conversation and why it's so good that we're in this moment having a bit of a real focus on industry in Brussels. But for the purposes of today's conversation, I did want to inject a bit of positivity as well, especially when we think about the medium term, and also to talk about what we're really seeing as having changed over the last few years in terms of the discussion on this. And the first is there's been a really clear narrative shift. This has already come through in what a couple of the other speakers have said, but we have a much more clear sense of the feasibility of transitioning these sectors. So we no longer really use this term hard to abate. We have a different understanding of the technology pathways available. So this big focus on electrification and the potential, in particular for low and medium heat processes and what we can do with that. There's been a lot of momentum, obviously, around green hydrogens and the string of pilot projects that were announced, and more so in Europe than elsewhere in the world. We've had lots of companies obviously setting net zero targets, and we've had lots of signals from companies that actually buy cement, steel, chemicals, that they are willing to pay a big premium in this space. We've got to turn that kind of willingness into actual orders and something tangible, but that is a really good and positive signal. And I'd say that all of that sense of momentum and that shift of our understanding of the technical feasibility has also, we've seen it really open up the political space for policy ambition. And obviously there are still gaps in the policy framework, but within the context of the last political mandate, we had a couple of pieces that came through that we should start to deliver for industry. So we obviously have an ETS that will start delivering changes as free allowances are phased out, as the carbon border adjustment mechanism is phased in. Questions around implementation and how we make all of that work, of course. There were some really good steps forward on product requirements and the type of definitions we need in this space under the Construction Products Regulation and elsewhere. We've seen some progress on infrastructure developments for CO2 storage under the Net Zero Industry Act. And there is some funding, in particular when we look at the Innovation Fund and the most recent announcements of new funding available for decarbonisation projects. And I think we are seeing that come through in terms of how some of the sectors are starting to account for the transition and also update their plans. So it's been interesting to see, for example, that the SEM Bureau roadmap really updated the medium-term decarbonisation target on the basis of the fact that there is more of a sense that CCS will deliver sooner and that CBAM and ETS revisions will deliver for them. We've also seen statements from Eurofer saying that the current project pipeline would reduce steel emissions by 81.5 million tonnes annually by 2030. So there are signs that this is starting to come through. There are still big bumps in the road. I would say a big one that we're worried about at the moment is electrification. We kind of keep selling electrification as, I'm going to use this term as well, Adina, but the low-hanging fruit of the transition. We're hearing stories of chemical companies who are trying to electrify one process unit to turn to their utility, and they ask for 400 megawatts, and the utility turns around and says, yes, in 2035. That is way too slow. If we can't even do this piece of the puzzle, I'm quite worried about it. So resolving the grid bottlenecks needs to be a fundamental piece of the clean industry deal. In a way, I'd say it's the cornerstone. It brings all of these elements together. I'd say on the hydrogen front, we're seeing a lot of difficult stories from the sector at the moment, and we're definitely seeing challenges in getting, that swathe of green steel pilots actually moving from announcements to final investment decisions, and lots of challenges in terms of actually making these projects come to fruition. And there are still critical policy levers that we know are missing for industry transition, and a lot of these have already been talked about by previous speakers. For us, definitely looking at the kind of finance piece and the kind of support that really needs to be there for early stage commercialization of these projects. So more that can be done with an enhanced and expanded innovation fund, more that can be done in terms of actually requirements on ETS revenues and use of those, also the new state aid framework and what that could look like. A whole suite of things. We've talked a lot about direct electrification already and development of fleet markets. I would also bring into this better planning and governance for industry transition. So mentioned a little bit that obviously a lot of the mandate for this currently sits at the member state level. I think actually delivering and really being able to create that real industrial policy push at the EU level really requires more planning together and centralization of these plans and more requirements on member states to really articulate what this looks like. That's a really difficult political conversation. It speaks a bit to what Marzena said before about the fact that we're having to think about what parts of supply chains need to maybe be outside of Europe in terms of access to critical raw materials, access to low carbon energy. And we're having to think about what parts of supply chains maybe need to be somewhere else in Europe. And that is an incredibly difficult political discussion. But I think for the purposes of having a competitive European industry transition, we need to unlock some of those conversations. And then the final element is really to say that, I mean, Florie mentioned this as well, but the circular economy part of this still really feels like it's missing. We've got a couple of places where we've got discussions about product standards and how we could articulate those targets around recycling, but really figuring out how we turn that into, something that delivers on a single market scale is something that has also really been missing the last few years. So I'll stop there.
Good. Well, thank you, Johanna. So basically, our introduction round is over, but we're, let's say, we ate a bit of our time. So now I'll ask some questions and let's say for asking us for a bit of a shorter response. Something Lucas said also fascinated me, and of course we have the international political developments this week, which we shall not mention. But we've seen industrial policy being developed in China and the US. Are there things we can learn from these policies? And I'll give the floor to Marzena immediately.
I didn't want to disappear without saying that bye-bye, but I will take a chance to quickly jump with a very short kind of food for thought. So obviously, when we have the results from elections in the US, which will have definitely huge impact on the conversation on this trade relations. But the Europe has absolutely no choice whether we trade or not. It's just the question how assertive we are in promoting our values, but also our interests, and not being naive. And the difference between 2016 and 24 is that this time around, there has been lots of conversations going on at the European level, but also in national capitals, how you know what the future might bring, and how we deal with the very complex global environment. But in the end, I think that we have ideas how to go forward and how to find our unique place in and achieve certain balance. We can't be closed, we can't be completely open, and we have a big array of different instruments on the trade side that we have been testing so far, but also that we can deploy in a more structured manner if needed be. But foremost, we still want to engage in a positive discussion. And obviously, elephant in the room, the border taxation is always the question of how much those trade flows there are and what are the trade flows. If we look at the structure of the trade balance between US and Europe, 30% of US imports from the US to Europe is around, unfortunately, fossil fuels. So it's not a simple conversation of simple trade flows, but also structural changes, how we see our future as an economic power and powerhouse. And it is not a separate debate. So I wouldn't be so negative. And I would like to plead in this conversation on putting the energy on what we can do. Let's use the phrase used across the Atlantic. We are not dropping the hands, we're rolling up the sleeves. So with that happy thought, I would like to leave and wish you the fruitful debate for the rest of the event. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Marzena. Thank you for your input. Flori, at CEF, okay, you have company members that are basically active all over the world, and US, China. What insights do you get from them on the different strategies, industrial strategies towards climate action, and are there things we can learn from that?
Sorry, can you specify a little bit the question, Thomas? So asking
it's basically, we see the last couple of years, we saw, for instance, the Inflation Reduction Act. We see investments, and that also goes for the non-ferrous industry, by the way, that might have been planned in Europe that move somewhere else because of the context, the policy that is there and is not here. And are there elements we can take from that, we can learn from that, we should implement even, or legislation we should say we shouldn't do that anymore?
Okay. Yeah, I think, I mean, there are some parameters that cannot be controlled. I mean, there is not much we can do. Is that growth in population is not happening in Europe. So that's, I think we need to recognize as an important factor. But of course, that is not the only one, because the chemical industry used to be a very big net exporter to the rest of the world, and we see that this position is deteriorating, and that we are moving more into a net importer situation. What maybe influences the company's decision when they need to invest I think that the case of BASF is a quite interesting one because yeah, I mean it's originally more a European based companies, and they are making, I mean, large investments are happening from that company in let's say in North West Europe with massive investments into offshore wind generation. So that is being jointly acquired by the company. At the same time, we see less positive developments happening in Germany with Ludwigshafen, which is historically really the big let's say center of production for the company, and now major investments taking place in China. I cannot speak for BASF what has impacted let's say the decision, but of course I think yeah the political situation, the energy situation is certainly not unrelated to these changes. So yeah, what we see in China, of course, there is the aspect, the attractiveness of lower production prices in those regions, but also maybe a more business-minded or let's say friendly approach to business, including on issues like permitting. So in Europe, we haven't had any major investment into steam cracking capacity. For I don't remember when was the last one, but it's a few decades ago. Now Ineos, also a global company, will invest in Antwerp into a new steam cracking ethane-based cracker. I mean, Thomas, you know the very long stories. I'm sure that that have happened around, let's say, the permitting for this new project that is very important for Europe, because steam cracking is at the basis of all chemical production, and finally, after many decades, it's taking place. And I think, yeah, it could also have been that the outcome was not so positive, taking in mind all the let's say very let's say yeah bumpy process for landing this on the ground. I remember recently I attended a presentation by yeah, I don't think they can be called a startup anymore, but a company that is doing CCU-based production. So they started in Iceland. They have a few pilots in the regions where maybe it's energy, access to energy is more favorable, and so they have started to develop some production based on captured CO2 in Europe, but it's more at the level of let's say demonstration. They started investing in China, and there you see the figures, the production figures. They are multiplied by 100, and this is really where you get depressed and you ask, okay, what is happening? Yeah, it's we went there, we talked to the Chinese government. We need this amount of energy, we need this permit, and in 1 year it happens. So I'm not advocating for Europe to become China, of course. I mean, don't get me wrong. But as you say, I mean, they are global companies, and if they get better chances to make these investments into innovative technologies in Europe, in a growing market, I mean, yeah, that's I think from an economic operator point of view, what unfortunately happens. CCU, I think, is a very good example. I mean, it's we have all the discussions around how ETS should be amended in order to really recognize the benefit of doing CCU. And yeah, I'm not saying there shouldn't be a discussion, but at some point, I mean, the net result is that we are just losing that. It's not happening. There is no incentive to make CCU happen in Europe, and that's one of the solutions for achieving circularity of production for the chemical sector. So,
Okay, thank you, Adina. From the side of non-ferrous metals at the high electro-intensity, what suggestions or ideas are going around to make sure that we keep the electricity prices under control, that we keep the electro-intensive sector competitive in Europe? Or what type of suggestions would you formulate to policymakers?
Thanks. I mean, I already touched upon a bit in my previous intervention. So I think right now the discussion is about besides the level of the power prices on the European market, the discussion is also related to the uncertainty of the prices in the future. And what we know is that there was the JRC study that came out, I think, last year, that looked at the organization of the energy of the power market and concluded that until 2035, the fossil fuels, namely gas, will still be setting the marginal price. So therefore, Europe will continue to be exposed to any fluctuations in the gas price. And now that we are more dependent on LNG, invest on LNG imports, that's a global commodity, so it's again more sensitive to other events happening around the world. So there's a greater degree of uncertainty and volatility. There's also some certainty related to the fact that, due to the reform of the ETS and more ambitious targets for 2030, there will be then the price of CO2 is expected to have an upward evolution. So that will be reflected in the power prices, because of the way the power market is organized in Europe, and the reliance still on fossil fuels to set the price. So I think all these elements, we have to take them into consideration when we think about companies that are trying to estimate where their power cost or their electricity cost will look at in 1 or 2 or even 5 or 10 years. So because that is for the non-ferrous metals, as I mentioned, the power cost is the biggest one. So if you tackle that, if you have that certainty, then the rest becomes easier. So how we can do that? Because there's a lot of discussion about the power purchase agreements, long-term contracts, and and they have proved their utility. Those companies that had already in place PPAs during the crisis, they were shielded from the impact. But right now, they're extremely difficult to sign long-term contracts. The volatility, the lack of predictability, the uncertainty related to the price, it's reflected in the final price of the PPA. So that's why, and there's the appetite for locking from everyone's side, being locked into a long-term contract for 10 years is also. It could be, it's not there. So in order to have, so right now the level of PPAs, the length would be around 2 or 3 years. So we need to, and even for that, it's still difficult to sign them. It's also part of the whole regulatory discussion about whether or not PPA should be encouraged or not, should be used or not. There are definitely different schools of thinking, and even the EU legislation and the competition, let's say the competition rules related to the long-term contracts, they have not been fostering the use of this element of this tool. So right now, to encourage that, when it comes, we need to, as I mentioned, the guarantee schemes that will mitigate the credit risk of off-takers, of the energy buyers. Then they also, signing the PPAs would also provide the certainty to the investors in new power capacities in renewable energy. So you have a big industrial consumer that is also backed with the promise of buying your output, would also be backed by EIB or the state, that would provide more certainty to everyone. And then we have we see the CFDs that has been so discussed recently. We see that they have a risk, they bring a risk of crowding out the PPA. So we are advocating for having more of a hybrid approach, and to implement a measure that also Draghi report touched upon, to reserve a part of the capacity that is sponsored through CFDs or through publicly support schemes, to reserve that part of capacity for PPAs with electro-intensive industries, and that would actually give more liquidity and more certainty to us. Then we have, obviously, we need to remove all the barriers. And there's still national barriers, also because there's a lack of knowledge, lack of administrative capacity at national level, or there is just the market is not that well developed. So barriers for PPAs, those have to be analyzed, and the Commission has this kind of obligation in the electricity market design. But they also need to be reduced. And then going to obviously the grids. The grid development. I'm sorry to say, but I've been doing energy for so long, and back basically 10 years ago, when I was in the Commission, this was the same discussion. There's not sufficient grid to integrate to connect all the power, all the renewable projects. And 10 years later, we're still in the same. So I think what we also need to do is just to learn, and actually learn from the past experience, and tackle that, implement those measures. And then we need the flexibility of the system. This is something that has not been discussed, but the overall system. There's a lot of discussion and a lot of misconception around the demand response of the industry. There's a tendency of placing the responsibility on the industry side, and to basically treat industrial consumers as batteries that can go up and down. That's wrong, because that should be a sectorial approach to this. Some sectors, some industrial sectors, they have the capacity of going up and down as a battery, the technological capacity, and they already do that because the market signals are there to go for the cheaper power price. But then for others, there's less technological capacity, and that leads to any long interruption that leads to damages and losses. So I think when we look at this whole flexibility of the system, we have to look at have a very sectorial approach, and to try to understand how everything works. And we need to also integrate. And what I know, what's also a bit of a problem, and I will stop after this. The policy has been focused a lot on the energy transition, on the supply side, but has left aside the need to integrate also the demand side into the policy, and to have this to stop the silo approach and to integrate the policies. And because any measure, any policy, and taken in the energy policy has an impact on consumers, big or small, or households. So until we have this exhaustive approach, this bringing both in the same discussion, and then we're always going to have a bit of friction, and we need to also look at the consumer side. Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you. From all what we heard, Lucas, Johanna, Lucas, what are, let's say, do you think are the 3 key priorities that should be in that Green Industrial Deal we will see hopefully presented in a couple of months.
Yes, thanks. So we've been working recently kind of on principles for good industrial policy, and let me share a little bit of thinking, because I think the first requirement would be that that we take a principled approach to the Green Industrial Deal and the subsequent legislation that's coming up. So I think first of all, it needs to be transformative, so focusing really on the technologies and areas that bring us to where we need to be in 2045, 2050, not to what's the right word, to throw a lifeline at obsolete technologies that might still have a lot of power here. We need to foster resilience and security of supply. Obviously, that needs to be balanced. What's the cost of resilience? I don't know how to measure that. I don't know how to model that. This is a big research question, I think, but this is probably going to be negotiated anyway. But I think thinking about that is crucial. We need to do it in a way that addresses regional and social disparities. So from the coal transitions work, we know that we will see a lot of resistance if we don't address injustices that have been also created by the status quo, right? So we need to not only take into account the potential job losses and losing company profits that happen in the transition, but also what happened before. We really need to focus on collaboration and not on nationalism and protection. This is both within the EU. I think the single market is the biggest asset. If we risk that, then we have no chance. Going back to my bicycling analogy, how many times have you seen someone take over a group and then the group, everyone looking at each other, it falls apart. It can only work if we work as a team. We still need to focus on competition and efficiency. There's a lot of talk about technology neutrality. I'm not a fan of that term. I think we need healthy competition, but we also need a clear signal which technological domains, like hydrogen, is the one. And leaving everything open gives not the bold signals that we need to actually move forward. We need consistency and reliability. Obviously, this is a long-term project, so we will have to revise and learn. But also, we need to have the goal in mind, and I think we might have some lessons of that. Okay, we will learn some lessons from the US. I'm not sure how industrial policy will continue in the US. Although the IRA is wildly popular, I could also imagine that Trump scraps it just out of spite. And who knows? I mean, it needs to be transparent and participatory, again, to ensure legitimacy, and it also needs to be pragmatic. We cannot wait for the perfect one. We need to learn along the way. So I think industrial policy doesn't fail if a single instrument doesn't deliver the results, but if we fail to adapt and learn and learn from our mistakes and continue to just work. And this is, I think, also a lesson from the US and China, that industrial policy works if it's bold enough, if it's clear enough. We cannot pay we cannot pay for everything indeterminately from public coffers, clearly, but there needs to be a bold signal. And I think that's also perhaps the most crucial point for the Clean Industrial Deal specifically, that we need to find a way to finance it collectively in Europe and get over this Gordian knot of financing the issue and not repeat the same mess that we had with the big and bold sovereignty fund that boiled down into small and tiny steps platform who no one remembers anyway. So I guess this will be the key question, I guess, to show the commitment, to show the resolve, and then I'm pretty sure that there will be also industrial follow-up and as Marzena said, rolling up the sleeves on the part of industry and civil society as well.
Okay. Jonas, same question for you. What do you see 3 key things we definitely need in that deal?
I'll just say one, just to keep it for time, and because this builds on what Lucas was saying. I think it's really helpful, the principles he laid out. I think fundamentally to actually deliver on those principles, you come back to this question of governance and creating a framework for actually delivering this. So the EU has been putting out industrial strategies like basically every 2 years on average for the last 10 years. We obviously came forward with the Green Deal Industrial Plan. We're now in a situation where we're like, this is not sufficient. We need to come forward with something else. How do we ensure that this time it has staying power? For me, that is, okay, this is not just about a communication where you have a list of things that we will do after this. It is about actually establishing governance, a mandate, a framework for how this is going to build over time and how member states will work together on this to deliver on the principles that Lucas set out. And I think that is going to be really important because the classic trajectory with this is the Commission comes forward with a communication. We look at the list of regulation that's come out from that and we work on it. I don't think that changes the game sufficiently. So really thinking carefully about, okay, what does it mean for member states to actually finance this differently together? We know the MFF debate is going to be really challenging. Okay, then let's look at the state aid framework and what it means to actually use member state resources, but in a different way where they can work together. So each of these issues, financing together, governing together, and deciding on which sectors and supply chains, how it is, all this comes back to how do you actually create a governance framework to delivering on this in a different way. And that requires the Commission to work differently, it requires member states to work differently, and obviously the politics of that currently are really difficult. We know what's happening in Germany at the moment. Berlin is really the main road into this. But maybe given what happened yesterday in the US, there's a new impetus, there's a new need to really think about how Europe steps up to the plate now and does industrial policy in a different way going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Also, yeah, I like the complementarity with between the principles and the governance, and I think it's been mentioned here quite a few times that the urgency of the whole thing at the moment. Keeping my eye on the clock, we have time for one question. We have one question here by Benjamin Gorlach and that's more aimed at the industrial sectors, but also Lucas, Johanna, you can intervene. That we see in these transition plans the need for hydrogen, the need for CO2, the need for electricity, and it's not only industry that will do that, also other sectors will move in that direction. How do we deal with this competition? Will there be enough electricity? Who gets priority? Will the market solve this? What is the view of, let's say, of CEPIC on this?
Yeah, maybe for electricity, it's not the easiest element to answer on, because I think, yeah, it's difficult to say where electricity should be prioritized. If you would ask me the question about hydrogen or about biomass, I could give you a clear answer. But I think we cannot. I mean, even as industry, dispute the fact that transport also needs to electrify, that heating also needs to electrify, and that, okay, we have a pool of solutions, and electricity is often the most straightforward way to reach your climate objectives. So yeah, we know, I mean, for transport, that would be one example. I mean, we know it's. I mean, I think it's the most efficient way from an energy consumption point of view to electrify. Biomass, yeah, as the chemical sector, we are not so much in favor, or at least we would like biomass to be prioritized towards feedstock and chemical applications, because we believe this is where we can make the most value out of this. And to come back on the topic of technology neutrality that Lucas was mentioning earlier, yeah, I partly agree there. It's important to let's say, yeah, we cannot target everything, and of course there are technologies need to be judged based on their cost efficiency in terms of delivering environmental benefits. But I also don't think what we have seen in the recent years, where hydrogen was the very big story for a few years, and now, oh surprise, we realize it's not such a big success. I mean, we could have told you maybe 3 years ago that this was not going to turn out the way it happened. Now we see the same with CCS. Yes, of course, CCS needs to be part of the mix of solutions, but now shooting completely, I mean, enormous targets and focusing all our efforts on it is also not going to do so. We should really look at, I mean, and this is what our modeling work we will show in a few weeks, is that you really need a pool of solutions, and sectors are not all the same. So we need really to assess what are the resources that we can realistically expect for the future, and how do we spread them across sectors in the future? Because yeah, we want electricity, but also we know that if we electrify transport, that means more biomass be freed for the chemical sector. So I think you cannot look at this in isolation from the other type of resources.
Yeah, very valid points. Lucas, you wanted to come back to this?
Yeah, just to respond, Flori, I think we're partly on the same page. I think what you did with respect to prioritizing the use of biomass as a feedstock for chemical industry over transport, this is the kind of not technology neutrality that we need. We need these kind of decisions. And obviously then the question of within these kind of decisions, which way to produce from those feedstocks, or which way to generate hydrogen, there is obviously a need for a healthy competition also on a technological level, but also we need some kind of broad political decisions on this is the directions, these are the priorities. And coming back to the question of electricity, I think here, yeah, this is kind of a bit of a dilemma that we know long term we need to electrify anything, and we need a lot of renewable energy to support that. But in the meantime, we will have a lot of demand and not enough supply, causing high prices, which again reduces the incentives to actually electrify. So here, I think we might actually need some sort of subsidies for electricity prices. Well, there's a lot of way to do this through the grid fees and things like that, or even direct fees. But I think what's crucial is that we need to link this to the state of the power mix, right? We need to make sure we have a sunset mechanism in a policy like that basically phases out the subsidy in the same time as we phase up or get towards 100% clean energy in the power mix, so that for everyone it's clear that if your technology, if your process is not competitive in 100% renewable energy system, then don't invest in it now, because the subsidies will go away automatically. So I think there is a lot of thinking that needs to be done in the next phase. Also, I think with respect to redesigning markets, electricity markets across Europe, this is going to be a huge task. I'm not an expert in the details here, but I guess that's what we have to face in the next 5 years, certainly.
Okay, thank you, Lucas. I also want to thank all the panelists for the very interesting, also very complementary input we got here. Also want to thank the participants for being patient and listening very well to this interesting debate. My takeaway is that yes, we see a pathway to climate neutrality for industry, but we face this incredible urgent issue with regard to competitiveness and deterioration of our industrial capacity, and that talking about 2040, 2050 targets might be interesting, but if we don't address the immediate need for, let's say, industrial modernization, industrial competitiveness, and the context in which industry will need to operate, we might achieve a 2040 target or 50 target, but it will be without having a credible industry in our continent. So the urgency. Also, and we've not mentioned the name that much in the debate so far, but the urgency, given the changed international context, has even increased. And I think I also appreciated the comment we had a few times that it's basically up to us. We need to roll up our sleeves and we need to work to get this done. And that means the think tanks, the universities, the industries, commission, governments, and I hope we can have a debate like this in, let's say, in 6 months, where we can really talk about implementation and how to move forward much faster. So thank you all and have a nice morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.